good to see you this morning. The title of our lesson this morning is God Hates Injustice. As God's people, we should operate in justice. We should be as fair as we can be to people and treat people the way that they need to be treated. There's so much social injustice in the world today. So many people that are just out for themselves, and they'll just trample over somebody to get to where they want to be. And so we need to be conscious of that, and we need to, as we recognize social injustice operating around us, we need to pray for God to correct those things. God says that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. And we need to pray for God to move in those situations that we see that are unjust. And it's hard. It's hard when it comes to your own doorstep to keep that attitude of, it's not mine to take revenge. It's God's place to do it. It's hard because we want to make things right ourselves. We want to do things. And I had a conversation not very long ago with my 8th graders. We were talking about revenge and seeking revenge, and we talked about how that it's a never-ending cycle with humans. If you start trying to get revenge on somebody, then they try to get revenge back, and before you know it, you've got all these people at war with each other, and so our response needs to be to pray and allow God to correct what is wrong. Let's take a look at Hosea chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. Hosea chapter 4, beginning with verse 1. Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel, for the Lord hath a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. By swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out, and blood toucheth blood. Therefore shall the land mourn, and every one that dwelleth therein shall languish, with the beasts of the field and with the fowls of heaven. Yea, the fishes of the sea also shall be taken away. Yet let no man strive nor reprove another, for thy people are as they that strive with the priest. What a sad condition Israel was in. They worshiped a God that was so mighty and so powerful that their ancestors just a few generations back had walked through the Red Sea on dry land, had been fed manna from heaven, had had God to bring quail into the camp, and they ate quail. They had inherited a land where there were vineyards that they had not planted. There were houses they had not built. God had provided for them. And so swiftly, within just a few generations, they had totally turned their backs on God. They had started worshiping idols. They had started worshiping themselves, just serving themselves, and forgotten all about God. And it tells us here in verse 1 that there was no truth, no mercy, and no knowledge of God in the land. They had basically rejected God and his ways. It tells us there in verse 2 that there was swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery. Blood toucheth blood. We live in a land like that today. We live in a land that has departed from God. America as a nation has turned their backs on God. You turn on the news and watch, and there are people that are protesting against things that are right, things that are just. And you've got people protesting by the hundreds and the thousands, protesting against what has happened recently, in recent years, to try to correct things that are wrong, to try to walk in the ways of God. It's wrong to kill babies. It's wrong. I don't want to hear women's rights. I don't want to hear that. Be a responsible woman. And don't cause that baby's death because you're irresponsible. Be a responsible man and do your part. Don't cause that baby's death because you're irresponsible. And yet we've got thousands of people taking to the streets and standing outside federal buildings protesting and yelling, women's rights, women's rights. I should have power over my own body. Well, you do. Be responsible. You know, we've got social injustice that's rampant in the world. And people defending that social injustice. They're defending the murder of innocent babies. I can't wrap my mind around that mindset. It just doesn't fit for me. It doesn't fit for me. Israel had basically done the same thing. There was idol worship involved here during this time period where they literally took their babies and threw them into a fire to sacrifice them to a pagan god because they were worshiping somebody other than the true Jehovah God. They had left off of all that was right and rejected God in his ways. Let's look at verses 8 through 12 in Micah chapter 3. Micah chapter 3, beginning with verse 8. But truly I am full of power by the Spirit of the Lord, and of judgment and of might, to declare unto Jacob his transgression, and to Israel his sin. Hear this, I pray you, ye heads of the house of Jacob, and princes of the house of Israel, that abhor judgment and pervert all equity. They build up Zion with blood, and Jerusalem with iniquity. The heads thereof judge for reward, and the priests thereof teach for hire, and the prophets thereof divine for money. Yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the house as the high places of the forest. Micah declared here in verse 8 that he was filled with the Holy Spirit and he was sent to declare God's judgment. And he began by talking not to the common people, but to the rulers in Israel, because they were doing so much wrong. They were taking bribes to declare what they called the word of the Lord. If you got to pay somebody to speak to you what God's speaking, you need to keep your money in your pocket. I believe in supporting church. I believe in supporting ministries. I believe in supporting men of God. But don't tell me to send you $50 and you'll anoint a cloth and send it to me and God will meet my needs. I shouldn't have to buy the gift of God. It's free. You know, we need to support our church. I'm not against that. You know, I'm all for tithing and giving offerings and supporting true ministry. But you cannot buy the gifts of God. You cannot do that. God's gifts are free to those who believe. And here these people were. They were taking bribes to speak what the people wanted to hear. I can go buy me somebody to tell me what I want to hear. People can be bought. It's easily done. You can go out and you can find somebody that will do what you want to do and say what you want to say. But it's not the truth. It's what you've bought. And that's what these people were doing. They were trying to buy prophecies, buy things. We should never allow ourselves to be bought. There should be no price on our integrity. There should be no price on the gifts of God that He has given us. God has given us all gifts freely. And we're to minister to people freely. And we're to minister what God has given us, not what people want to hear. You know, sometimes I have to speak what people don't want to hear. Sometimes I have to do that. We all do. You know, sometimes when we have children running around and they want something and we have to say, no, you can't have that. And they want to cry and they want to whine and they want to talk about how mean we are because they can't have their way. But we've got to do that for their own good. Sometimes God puts restraints on us for our own good. And God had put restraints on Israel for their own good. He had allowed them to be overrun by the Babylonians, by the Assyrians, by these armies. Not because He didn't love them, but because He did love them. And He wanted them to recognize their evil ways and to repent and to turn to Him so that He could provide for them. It's not pleasant to be told no when you want to do something. Anybody in here enjoy being told no? I don't. I don't enjoy being told no. I want my way. But sometimes God has to say, that's not the way you need to go. And these people were allowing themselves to be bought by the children of Israel so that they could just tell the children of Israel something they wanted to hear, not what God was speaking. God, help us to desire to hear God's true word, not what we want to hear. And God, help us if we're speaking for God to speak God's true word and not what the people want to hear. Because sometimes those are two opposite things. Let's look at Zephaniah chapter 3. Starting at verse 1. Woe to her that is filthy and polluted, to the oppressing city. She obeyed not the voice, she received not correction, she trusted not in the Lord, she drew not near to her God. Her princes within her are roaring lions, her judges are evening wolves. They gnaw not the bones till the morrow. Her prophets are light and treacherous persons, her priests have polluted the sanctuary, they have done violence to the law. Zephaniah was pronouncing judgment against those who were taking advantage of people for their own gain. We see this in the church world and in the secular world today. Preachers and politicians with no morals, looking for ways to gain power and wealth. And the most vulnerable populations are the ones they usually go after. They'll go after the poor of the land. They'll go after the uneducated of the land, looking for ways to gain power and status. Look at what Zephaniah says that the city of Jerusalem had done. It says in verse 2, she obeyed not the voice. So they did not obey God's voice. Are we guilty of that sometimes? I am. It's a dangerous thing not to obey God's voice. And then once they hadn't obeyed God's voice, it says she received not correction. Sometimes when we don't obey God's voice, He brings correction to us. And it's important that we receive it. I can remember very clearly growing up, and I didn't get very many spankings growing up because I was good at hiding my meanness. And I was kind of afraid of that switch that my daddy, or that belt that my daddy swung, that switch my mama swung, so I kind of tried to behave the best I could and hide it when I didn't behave. But I can remember getting spanked and being able to look back at it later and think, I deserved that. I did wrong. I knew what I was doing. I shouldn't have done it. If I hadn't done it, I wouldn't have been in trouble. Do you know God expects us to have that same attitude when He corrects us? When He gives us a spanking, you ever had a spanking from God? When He gives us a spanking, He expects us to look back on what we've done and say, yeah, I did wrong. Yeah, God was right in punishing me. I shouldn't have done that. If we reject God's correction, it takes us further into rebellion against Him. If we receive His correction, it helps us not to make that same mistake again. I usually didn't get spanked for the same thing more than once. Usually only took one spanking, and I corrected that part. Might do something else different, but, I pretty much corrected that. We need to be willing to receive God's correction. It says she trusted not in the Lord. You ever been in a situation where you didn't trust God like you needed to? I've been there. Gone out on my own. And went, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? It's really easy when we don't obey God and we don't receive His correction to just go ahead and trust in ourselves instead of trusting in Him. Go ahead and see how that works out for you. I'm a human. I fail on a daily basis. I'm a failure somehow on a daily basis, especially if I trust in my own abilities, in my own talents, in my own giftings. I've got to trust in the Lord. And by trusting the Lord, I can have the testimony of being an overcomer. I can have the testimony of being victorious. But when I trust in Lavona, I'm setting myself up for failure. And so we need to trust in God. And then she drew not near to her God. Didn't draw close to God. We are meant to walk close to God, to draw near to Him, to communicate with Him, to pray and listen for His voice, to read His Word, to fast, to attend church, to participate in ministry, to do what God's called us to do. It's really hard to sin when you're walking close to God. Did you know that most of the time when people sin, it's when they've drawn away from God. They've slipped away from God. They've quit reading their Bibles. They've quit praying. They've quit attending church. That's usually when the devil moves in. If you watch animals like lions and tigers and wolves and all these predatory animals, they don't run usually up into the middle of a flock and grab some sheep or goat or whatever out of the middle of the flock. They look for that one that's straying behind. They look for that one they can cut off from the rest of the flock. That's what happens to us when we separate ourselves from God and we separate ourselves from our brothers and our sisters and we begin to isolate ourselves. We become vulnerable to the predator, that roaring lion, Satan, who comes after us because we've not stayed close to God, the shepherd, and we've not stayed close to those others who are following close to God. Find you a group of people that you can associate with that are like-minded people who want to serve God with our whole heart and who will encourage you when you're having difficulty, and you can encourage when they're having difficulty. Find yourself that group of people you can surround yourself with and draw close to God with them. It's important that we do that because that helps us to stay away from sin, to avoid sin. Let's look at Zephaniah chapter 3, verses 5 through 7. The just Lord is in the midst thereof. He will not do iniquity. Every morning doth he bring his judgment to light. He faileth not, but the unjust knoweth no shame. I have cut off the nations, their towers are desolate. I made their streets waste, that none passeth by. Their cities are destroyed, so that there is no man, that there is none inhabitant. I said, surely thou wilt fear me, thou wilt receive instruction, so their dwelling should not be cut off. Howsoever I punished them, but they rose early and corrupted all their doings. God is in the midst of people. Very often, when we look at situations that people are in, we look at the evil that is in this world. It's easy for us to wonder where God is. You ever been through a situation where you felt like God had abandoned you? I think we've all been there at some point. God, where are you in this mess? Where are you? But I'm telling you, God is there. He's always present. God is always present with us. But sometimes He chooses to allow things to happen without intervening. And it's hard to understand that. It's hard to understand why God doesn't intervene. When we see things going wrong, it's hard for us to keep in mind that God will bring judgment and justice to this world. There is coming a day of judgment. See, we, in our microwave generation, want instant judgment. We've gotten so accustomed to instant answers. I can pick up my cell phone over there and punch in a message to somebody that's in my list of contacts, and within seconds have an answer. I can go home today and pop some macaroni and cheese in the microwave, and it's ready in a minute and a half. We live in an instant society where we want things to happen right now. And sometimes we say, God, I want your judgment. I want it right now. These people are doing wrong. What if, when you had done wrong, God had listened to that prayer from the person you hurt? What if you had been judged instantly? I'm telling you, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here. I've been wronged, and I've done wrong. And if God had pronounced judgment on me, I wouldn't be here. So we need to be careful that we extend mercy just like we have been extended mercy. God will judge and bring justice to this world. Let's see Zechariah chapter 7, verses 8 through 10. I'm telling you, these little bitty books, if you turn 2 pages, you've skipped the book. So if y'all see me flipping back and forth, it's because I'm skipping a page or two, and there went the whole book. Zechariah chapter 7, verses 8 through 10. And the word of the Lord came unto Zechariah, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, Execute true judgment, and shew mercy and compassion every man to his brother. And oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, the stranger, nor the poor. And let none of you imagine evil against his brother in your heart. What does God want for us? What does it take? In my Bible, there's a heading there above that group of verses I just read. And the heading is God's standard of righteousness. Look at what it says. Execute true judgment and shew mercy and compassion every man to his brother. Be merciful and compassionate, every man to his brother. It's not talking about just your biological brother. We are all brothers and sisters, all of us. We are to extend mercy and compassion to the people we meet. Sometimes it's hard, especially if it's somebody that's hard to deal with. I have people in my life sometimes that are hard to deal with. And not too long ago, I had a person that was hard to deal with. And Steve and I were out shopping, and God dealt with me to buy that person a gift. Somebody that was hard to deal with. Somebody that really didn't deserve a gift. You know, it's pretty easy for me to bring the people here, gathered here today, a gift. I love y'all. Y'all are good to me. It's really, really easy to bring something to you because we have a good relationship. It's easy to give gifts to those people that you have a good relationship with. But what about those people who try your patience? What about those people that have spoken harsh words to you? What about those people who have snubbed their nose up at you like they were better than you are? What about those people who have hurt your feelings? What about those people who wouldn't pull you out of a fire if they were there? Can you bring something to them? Can you extend mercy and compassion to them? Do you know, I believe that that's when the world truly recognizes the work of Christ in our lives, is when they see us being kind to somebody who hasn't been kind to us. When they see us paying somebody something they didn't earn, they didn't deserve. I didn't deserve for Christ to die for me. I didn't deserve that. I deserved judgment. But he loved me enough. He had enough mercy and compassion on me that he died for me. Would you die for your children? Would you die for your parents? Most people would say yes to that. Would you die for your enemy? Most people's going to say no, including me. I've not arrived there yet, God. God help me. I'm not there yet, Sister Roberta. I'm not there. I've got to grow more in the love of Christ to be able to extend mercy and compassion to those that I feel like are unworthy of it. Because that's what we do. We look at people and we decide, are they worthy of what I have to offer or not? But that's really not Christ-like. Christ extended mercy and compassion to those who were not worthy of his mercy and his compassion. And we see that over and over in his ministry. What does God desire? He desires that we extend that mercy and that compassion to the people around us. He desires that we don't oppress the widow. Widows in Bible times were some of the most vulnerable populations of all. You know, today, although it's difficult to be a widow, today, widows have it a little better than they did in Bible times. We've instituted financial programs to help widows. But in Bible times, they were just vulnerable, especially a widow who had no sons. They were vulnerable because it was up to those sons to step in and take care of the mother when the dad passed. There weren't really any true occupations for women for them to make a living, not really. They were taken advantage of. Nor the fatherless. People who have no daddies. Orphans. Children are vulnerable. They're vulnerable. The stranger, nor the poor. Strangers. Be kind to people who aren't a part of your area. We can spot those people who aren't Grundy County people. Miles away. Be kind to them. Be kind to them. We tend to want to have things our own way. Not have people come in and change things. We've got our county just the way we want it. Thank you very much. We don't need your outside input. Anybody else got that attitude? Don't come in here trying to tell me I've got to eat sweet cornbread. I kind of like Sister Faith's sweet cornbread now. I've got used to it. You know, we tend to not want always to welcome those people who are outsiders. But we're to be kind to those people. Show them mercy. Show them compassion. Be welcoming to them. And let none of you imagine evil against his brother in your heart. Woo! That one's tough right there. Anybody ever said, if I could get by with it, I'd, and just fill in the blank with what you'd do. Well, I'd like to be able to just have them right here, right now, and this is what I'd do if I could. No. No, we're going to put you all the way on the back seat of the van. We're going to punish you with the back seat of the van. You better behave. It's very easy to get caught up in that, of thinking evil against somebody because they've done wrong to us or wrong to somebody we love. I'll get even one way or the other. Anybody ever said that? I have. I'll get even with you one way or the other. No. Don't fall in that trap. Don't do that. Don't even imagine what you would do. Look at that. It doesn't say none of you do evil against his brother. It says none of you imagine evil. Think it. Just don't even think it. Because you know what? If you think on it long enough, you'll do it. You'll give that sin a little seed to grow, and the next thing you know, you'll be doing what you were thinking. That's why it's telling us. None of you imagine evil. Don't imagine it. Don't think on it. Because if you do, you're going to wind up acting on it. We're to give no place to the devil. Let's look at verses 11 through 14. But they refused to hearken and pulled away the shoulder and stopped their ears that they should not hear. Yea, they made their hearts as an adamant stone, lest they should hear the law and the words which the Lord of hosts has sent in his spirit by the former prophets. Therefore came a great wrath from the Lord of hosts. Therefore it is come to pass that as he cried and they would not hear, so they cried and I would not hear, saith the Lord of hosts. But I scattered them with a whirlwind among all the nations whom they knew not. Thus the land was desolate after them, that no man passed through nor returned, for they laid the pleasant land desolate. In verses 11 and 12, We have the people's reactions to God's word. He's called them to repent. But it says in verse 11, they refused to hearken. They refused to listen. And pulled away the shoulder. Pulled away from God. And stopped their ears that they should not hear. And how did God respond? He allowed them to be overrun by foreign nations. When they wouldn't hear, he said, okay, fine. I'll let you be overrun by foreign nations. They'll carry you away captive. And when they cried out to him, he refused to hear them. If we make up our minds that we're not going to listen to God, he'll send correction in our lives. And he'll refuse to let our prayers pray us out of our mess. You know, we see sometimes these actions in children when there's an adult trying to correct a child. And as I was studying this, I was thinking about Tyler, our grandson. And back several years ago, he was about probably 4, 5. We were keeping him there at the house, and I was correcting him about something he was doing. And he did this. La, 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 la. I'm not hearing you. I'm not hearing you. That was a bad idea, Sister Tammy. It was a really bad idea. And he has some learning disabilities. He has some issues. But he takes advantage of those sometimes and just does what he wants to do because, you know, that's the heart of a child. They want to do what they want to do. And so you can just imagine the correction he got for plugging his ears up and saying he wasn't hearing me. And he was able to hear me after he got some correction. But I still loved him. Even in correcting him, I had mercy on him. I had compassion on him. If we plug up our ears to God and we refuse to hear what God has to say, he'll bring correction to us. But even in his correction, there is love. So this morning and this week, as you go about your business, be sensitive to the voice of God. If you do disobey, allow him to bring correction in your life. Receive that correction, knowing that he has great love for you. And respond correctly to those situations you find yourself in where you feel that there is no justice, because we serve a God who will bring